Yeah, I keep dropping out for some. All right. The other thing that this does while I'm in this zone real quick is that our system can utilize existing hypercard stacks. In other words, you don't have to make stuff just like you didn't have to use applications that, just like I could use an application as I just did, which was a gravity simulator, and link it into the flow of the way our system works. We can also do that with existing hypercard stacks. So here's rotation and gravity, which is a existing hypercard stack that's public domain. And notice this little box up here off to the left, this little palette with a symbol for a book on it. If I click on that, a miniaturized version of our entire interface pops up as a palette. This is kind of tricky for those of you that have played with palettes and stuff in HyperCard. This is actually a palette with pop-up icons, which we were really kind of the first to do. Right? So it's a flying palette, but it's also, if you will, kind of connected to our interface system, so that we can use the same qualities of relationship and bring them to already existent HyperCard stacks. So collector's case, alternative representations, put it back, no, I don't need the whole thing. Or I've seen enough of this stack, and zip back to where we were. So that our system, again, can integrate people's existing HyperCard stacks, people's existing applications, and make it so that a learner's meaning needs at the word, term, phrase level, or a learner's meaning needs at the overall representation level, allow them to unfold or travel into these various things.
I'm wondering, why are you here?
Really loud. This was a case that when I asked for a particular module, the system kind of self-situated itself, put up a picture, played a sound, situated itself, threw up a text, and it did all that is just part of opening up and moving into that terrain. That's something that we do to enable this system to have lots of dynamism at the learner's level. So this is scripted, if you will, from an authoring perspective. And yet, it's very simple from a learner's perspective. It's like when they turned the page, it just did all of this stuff. There wasn't any great complexity associated with making it do that. And yet, the same powers exist. I can go in here and say, okay, well, I don't need to see that. I would be real interested in by the way, this reminds me, there's an article sitting back there where the microphone is that was just published in the California School Board's journal, which talks about the basic ideas that we're talking about today, pretty lightly but accessibly, and how this little guy, Darren, my son, was really the principal designer of what you're looking at. And again, pop this back, it flags me that that's what I was looking at the time that I moved through the material, and I can just keep moving on from there. Let's hope I don't have some problems with this. I do.
Ustedes pueden influenciar cómo se siente acerca del trabajo.
Now the point is that the same dexterities that allow the basic system to jump from one representational lens to another can just look at representational lenses like languages, because that's essentially what they are. They're different lenses to do the same thing in terms of meaning. In fact, maybe I'll take a second and use the learner scope metaphor to kind of make sure that we're home on this before going on. One of the original metaphors for designing this was the idea of a learner scope. The idea that we're providing something that was like a microscope for learners that had a series of rings of lenses on it, just like we think of a microscope, and that at one level the rings were different ways, different angles of view that would have different, engage different sensory biases or different cognitive biases that would engage different preferences, if you will. So that a learning objective could be viewed as a slide that we just put into the learner scope for the moment, and that as the learner looked down into that, and the learner could spin this top level of lenses until it basically started to cohere, it basically started to get clear. And that as they did that, then they would begin to see the particular things, the particular words, terms, phrases, sounds, or pictures that made up this point of view. And that in the course of doing that, if they encountered one that didn't make sense to them, again, one of the elements, then they'd go down to the next level of lenses and spin that until that became clear. So that what we were talking about providing for learners was this learner scope, this way of kind of spinning the ball until it was generally clear and then traveling through words, terms, and phrases to what they essentially mean in ways that were accessible for the individual learner. The basic premise of all this being that if the learners had a way to act on their own meaning needs in relation to their learning environment, they could learn anything. Anybody could learn anything if the system was sufficiently responsive, and I really believe that. So multiple languages, multiple representations, certain representations being more multimedia than others, certain representations being more interactive, more simulator, more physically participative, certain modules being tests or quizzes that cause learners to cycle back into different points. Same basic anatomy of relationship. Quick references, alternative representations, gross navigation, meaning jump to a different table of contents where I've been in the past, an index or a library. And here's an interesting twist, which people that have evaluated this from a pure economy or ecology of interface point of view have liked. Notice this icon up here always indicates what representation mode I'm in. If I click on it, this shows me where I've been in representation space, my own personal history, my own recent personal history, this being since the last time I cleared it this morning. So if I want to go back to the key points, I don't have to use the system's interface. I can just jump back in my own personal history, jump forward and backward that way, which is very, very helpful. Similarly, in reference space, these are the references we looked at. Say, geez, there was something about philosopher I wanted to visit again. So I can travel back in my own personal reference travels or my own personal representation travels, rather than just having to use the structures, content-related modes of navigation. Yes?
I'm having difficulty understanding how an individual learner adds into their own module and plug into various databases of representational knowledge.
Created to feed this?
Your history of today for you there.
Right.
But presumably there are 30 of us, and I've got mine.
Right.
And how is mine tying into the same database that yours is? And who is constructing that? Who is producing all of these representations?
Okay.